Who's used React Native here before? Who's used Expo before? And has anyone published any apps to the app stores? That's okay. So basically, this is going to be a very kind of high-level overview of starting out with React Native. So just to give you a bit of background to myself, so I'm a front-end developer. I actually started out in graphic design before I went into development. I went through Flash to start with. Still got its supporters, by the sounds of it. And then moved on to HTML and did a lot of WordPress. And I worked for a SEO agency for several years. And most recently, I've been at the University of Bristol doing React with SharePoint, the newest SPFX SharePoint. In my own projects, I've been doing a bit of Ionic, and my experiences with React have led me to do some React Native projects. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to go through. I'm actually going to start with Ionic just as an example, because I think it's quite a good starting point. The reasons I moved to React Native from Ionic. React versus React Native. So if you've done a bit of React before, how many people have done React? We're using React? A lot of people. Okay. Expo, a bit of explanation of that. What you'd need in terms of on top of Expo to actually make a fully working app. And getting into the app stores, which is sometimes a bit of a process. So just as an overview, this is one of the first apps I built, which was with Ionic. It was for, as the name suggests, for guitarists. It was basically a reference app for scales, musical scales and modes. Underneath the hood, this is actually just Angular. So until recently, Ionic was purely based on Angular. It was basically a wrapper, though the latest version now allows you to use Vue and React as well. But I started with this, and I published this to Google Play and got a fair few sales, and it was good enough for the time. But I kind of got a little bit frustrated because you're quite limited, because at the end of the day, it is just a website. So if you're trying to make an app feel like a native app, but it's actually just a website, I'm sure we all understand that's very limiting in terms of design and performance and animations and all those things. So mainly, the web view is one of the biggest issues with Ionic. This isn't having to go at Ionic. Ionic is great for what it's used for, but these were my issues with it, which is why I went to React Native. But yeah, as I said, it was basically just a website, so you're quite limited in layout. You're down to CSS and HTML, obviously. You're then using Cordova to access any native features of the phone itself, so anything like the camera, storage, file systems. You're going through Cordova's libraries to do that. And Cordova's really good, but again, I didn't feel it was quite as good as an all-round library that like React Native or Flutter offer. As I said, it used to be based on Angular, and now it's actually allowing you to use React and Vue, and no framework at all if you don't want to. So these are my main reasons. So I said the web views are slow. One of the biggest problems I found that apps didn't feel native in terms of their performance. I think we can all kind of relate to that. If you ever used to use probably the Facebook app, the original Facebook app that was built in HTML, and they ended up redoing it as native code because it just didn't have that performance to it. You can tell when until recently you could tell when it wasn't a real app, and that was one of the things that frustrated me. You couldn't do animations really. Again, it was a website, so you're quite limited on what you could do compared to, I think, again, native apps, things like Snapchat, for example, or apps like that with a lot of animations in. There's nothing like that possible, really. And it had a heavy reliance on third-party libraries and on Cordova. And I found quite a few bugs on that because, again, you're using third-party libraries to try and achieve something and fool the user into thinking it's natively written. So the pros I found with React, the performance from start, it isn't quite as good as truly native, but it's very close. And again, that depends on what you're doing in the app itself. There's a huge community. Obviously, we understand React has skyrocketed, really. It's the main framework, pretty much. And because of that, there's a big library of additional React Native libraries that you could use. There's a lot of ready-made components, like there is in React itself. And again, that's expanding quite rapidly. animation support is really good. You can use several libraries to animate. You can also use a library called Lottie, where you can use, I've got the name of the program as an Adobe program, where you can animate and then you can migrate those animations into React Native, and they feel like natively coded animations. And more importantly as well than all those things probably is stability, that I found it crashed a hell of a lot less than a hybrid app did. So these are just a few examples of live apps on the app stores now which have been built with React Native. So Facebook use it partially in their own app. It's not wholly React Native, but I know there are sections. And these are all taken from Facebook's site as well. So the Ads Manager is built with it. I know Instagram uses it heavily. The new Skype app has been entirely built with React Native quite recently. They did an entire rebuild on that. The F8 conference, the Facebook conference app, they build purely in React Native. Pinterest uses it a fair amount. These, again, there's several other quite large firms using it, but I think these are kind of the flagship ones. So one of the biggest things, if you're starting out, is probably what the difference is between React if you've got a grounding in that. So the definitions I found, which kind of summed it up, is that React is a library and React Native is a framework. So one of the first things you'll see is there's no divs, obviously, because it's not a website. So view tags replace divs. But aside from that, if you're coming from a React background, it's very easy to migrate and start building apps, because it's the same underneath, really. It's just using slightly different tags and obviously a slightly different ecosystem, but fundamentally it's the same. It doesn't use CSS. Again, it's not a website. So it uses, you can write JavaScript, CSS in JS, but it's not using that under the hood. For layout, it's using Flexbox, and that allows a lot of powerful styling, which again was one of my main issues with hybrid mobile apps. And it has also many other inbuilt features, which I'll briefly touch on. So it's just an example code from the Facebook site again, but this looks very familiar. There's really no difference between this and a basic React web app, apart from, as you can see here, the view tags have replaced div tags. And you're importing text as well, so there's no divs or spans. Text is wrapped in text tag, images are wrapped in images tags. Again, it's quite self-explanatory. This is an example of Flexbox. So this is something that I struggle to achieve, again, in hybrid apps. But if you know Flexbox or if you're using it, again, it's very straightforward to achieve quite powerful layouts. Just a couple of definitions that I found, which kind of sum it up. React.js is a JavaScript library that you use for constructing a high-performance UI layer. React Native is an entire platform allowing you to build native cross-mobile apps. So if you look at React Native, this is what you'll probably find to start with, this thing called Expo. And this was slightly confusing for me because I had no idea what I was really doing. And this was quite new when I first started out. So Expo is a tool chain, basically. So when React Native was first released, there was quite a few issues with developers getting to grips with it because of the amount of setup that it took just to produce a running app, to build an app, just locally. So Expo was somewhat of an answer to that. So effectively, it allows you to build your apps in simulators and on your phone through JavaScript much quicker than it would be to compile native code and actually run that every time you want to make a change. So it's effectively a tool chain, but it actually does more than that as well. So it allows you to eventually build the app itself in the cloud. So what that means is with React Native, if you eject from Expo and just use React Native raw, you'd have to have a Mac to build for iOS, and obviously you'd have to have Android, all the Android libraries installed in order to build for that. Whereas with Expo, you can basically upload your final code and it's built in the cloud on their servers and will give you the binary files, which is a huge advantage, especially if you don't want to buy a Mac to build for iOS. Apart from that as well, it allows, well, there's several features, but over-the-air updates is a massive advantage. This is something there's several different versions of, but Expo integrates its own. Again, what it means is that once you've done your changes and you push your code up to Expo servers, you can create binary standalone apps. However, you can also allow that code to be pushed to existing apps which have already gone through the app stores if it's JavaScript and HTML and CSS. So if it's not app names, for example, or like the manifest files, you can make changes over the air without having to release updates to the app stores, which is a huge bonus, because actually downloading the binaries and uploading those and going through the App Store process every time is a very time-consuming process itself. So these are a few of the features, and I'll give you a screenshot in a minute, but with Expo you can monitor the progress of your app with the toolchain. So as it builds on the CLI that Expo have built, it allows apps to be built much quicker than local builds. You can share apps with the end users via an Expo app itself. So on the Meetup website, I've got an open source app which is linked on there. So if you download the Expo app from Google Play or iTunes, you can then scan the the QR code, or get the link of any Expo app, which is basically just the app that's been pushed to Expo servers, and run it within that app wrapper. So effectively, if you want to create an app for your company and not have to go through the app stores, something internal, this is a much more streamlined, quicker way of doing that than having to pay to be on iTunes, etc. As I mentioned, you can publish over-the-air updates, and no need for Macs if you want to develop iOS. And it's just a screenshot of the command line interface that Expo provide. So again, this is a QR code that you can scan locally and see your changes within 30 seconds, depending on how powerful your mobile is to compile those changes in real time. And again, there's not much difference at all in terms of the code. I'm just, in this example, importing some Expo libraries. This one's just an icons library. But it's all just React under, at the end of the day. It's just another library. And this is the Expo client itself that you can download from the app stores. If anyone's interested, this is the open source app that I created from a portfolio. So that's available on GitHub. And again, if you get that Expo client app, you can scan the barcode or click the link and run that app instantly without having to actually download the app itself. I've not uploaded the app to the app stores. For that reason, it's a demonstration of exactly that. So the only downside is that if you're using Expo, you might be limited by what it offers. So it does offer most things you'd want out of the box, but if you're doing something more custom, maybe you want to write some native code, you would then have to detach from Expo. This is possible. You can detach from React Native generally anyway, but if you want to detach from it, it will then compile it down to a raw React Native app again, so you are then able to add in features, whether in Java or Swift or whatever you're using for that app itself. So you're not limited, you're not locked into Expo permanently. So again, after I got going with Expo, I next had to find out what I was doing with navigation. So Expo doesn't come with any navigation out of the box, which again it's not very clear. So you will just end up with a screen. So again, there were several options for that. Also options for the UI and other UI elements. React Navigation is now probably the biggest library that you can use for it. So with React Navigation, it's all JavaScript based. They've really put a lot of performance into optimization into that library to try and match it to native performance. And again, out of the box, I don't think most people could probably tell. There is more native ones that use the UI layer rather than JavaScript. However, for those, you'd have to detach from Expo. And I think it's for that reason of not detaching that React Navigation's really kind of taken off, and it's become pretty much the main library. It allows you to create stacks and drawers and tabs and pretty much any kind of general navigation layout that you're probably familiar with using. And again, it's very simple. It really didn't take long at all for me to kind of get my head around it and actually build an app with tab navigation that would be very familiar to any user. This is another library that I ended up using a lot, React Native Elements. So again, you don't get anything out of the box. So these are all custom elements that you can just drop in. It saves you a lot of time in terms of having to style up and work on the UI elements of things which you would expect to be part of React Native itself. And Native Base is another one. The nice thing about Native Base is if you use any of their components, they are styled automatically for either iOS or Android. So again, it's cross-platform. You don't have to put individual styling in. I'm just going to touch briefly on the app stores themselves. So I've uploaded to both app stores, Google Play and iTunes. If you've not done anything with app stores before, the main difference is probably cost. For Google Play, $25 one-time membership. They take 30% per app, and there's a 59p minimum charge. The review times I find are really short. You can update your apps and roll those out very quickly, and it seems to be a little more open than Apple in terms of quality control. Apple's a bit more expensive, $99 a year, every year, and they take 30% again, and then a 99p minimum charge. My experience with Apple was that they took about 2 weeks to review my first app and came back with several quite ambiguous issues with it, which it actually took a phone call from them in California. They actually called me to discuss it in the end because they weren't being very clear. Again, you probably experienced this is just, again, their philosophy versus Google. They're very protective of what goes on their app stores. And also they're quite slow in that sense. So if you update your app, it can take several days to get that update to go out. And they're very, like I said, very stringent on their quality guidelines. And this is just a review of a few of apps I've got published. So again, I've mentioned the guitarist, Scala Modes, and a couple of tour apps which I've written, one in Bristol, all the Banksy tours, and the Beatles locations in Liverpool. If you're interested, please check those out. And finally, I'm available for hire at the moment because I've just finished my current role literally this week. So I'm currently at the University of Bristol, but I finish on Friday. So please get in touch. And that's it.